China has the oldest continuous civilization on Earth, 5,000 years. But civilizations that old don't just have history, they have codes. 7 of them, still running, stand in any Chinese city at dawn. Elderly people practice Tai Chi in the park. The same movements, the same hour, everywhere. A street vendor arranges his goods with quiet precision. A businessman exchanges business cards with both hands. A slight bow. A grandmother instructs her grandchild in the proper way to address an elder. None of this was taught in a classroom. It was absorbed over generations. China is a country where the past does not feel like the past. It feels like instruction. Some historians suggest that what makes China so difficult to understand from the outside is that the codes governing daily life are older than most Western nations, older than the United States by 4,000 years, older than France by 4,500. 7 codes, none of them written in a single document, all of them still shaping how 1.4 billion people think, decide, and relate. What the textbooks say, China's recorded history begins with the Shang dynasty approximately 1600 BC. Before that, the legendary Xia dynasty, whose existence remains debated among historians. The Zhou dynasty that followed produced Confucius born 551 BC, whose ideas would shape Chinese civilization for the next 2,500 years. The first unified Chinese empire was established by Qin Shi Huang in 221 BC. He standardized weights, measures, currency, and writing across a vast territory. That unification, the idea that China is one civilization, one written language, one cultural identity, has been the central organizing principle of Chinese governance ever since. 25 dynasties followed, each different in origin, religion, and political character, all of them governing through variations of the same Confucian administrative framework. The official story presents China as a continuous civilization that absorbed its conquerors. The Mongols, the Manchu, both eventually governed through Chinese institutions. In Chinese, by Chinese norms. The textbooks call this cultural resilience. Some historians suggest it is something more structural, not resilience. Code. Code 1 face. Mianzi. The concept of face has no precise equivalent in Western languages. It is not simply reputation. It is the social currency through which relationships, respect, and belonging are negotiated. To give someone face to praise them publicly, to acknowledge their status creates obligation and goodwill. To cause someone to lose face to criticize them publicly, to contradict them before others, is a serious social injury. Some sociologists suggest that the concept of face shapes Chinese social interaction at every level, in business negotiations, in family dynamics, in political relationships. One interpretation holds that face is not simply a cultural preference, it is a social operating system, a way of managing the inevitable tensions of a densely populated society where maintaining harmony is a survival necessity. The record shows a concept documented in Chinese literature and philosophy for over 2,000 years. What it doesn't show is how many Western misunderstandings of China begin with not knowing it exists. Code 2 Guanxi. Guanxi means relationships, but not relationships in the casual Western sense. Guanxi is a network of mutual obligations, carefully cultivated, meticulously maintained, activated when needed. In Chinese society, Guanxi determines access to opportunity, to resources, to protection, not because of corruption, though it can shade that way, but because in a society of 1.4 billion people, trust must be built through personal connection before it can be extended to strangers. Some economists suggest that Guanxi functions as China's informal institutional infrastructure. In contexts where formal, legal, and commercial systems were weak or unreliable across much of Chinese history, Guanxi provided the trust framework that made economic activity possible. One interpretation holds that Chinese business culture is not simply different from Western business culture. It is operating on a different layer of social architecture, one built over 2,000 years. The record shows a concept so embedded in Chinese commercial life that it is taught in international business schools worldwide. What it doesn't show is how long it took those schools to notice it. Code 3 Confucian Hierarchy. Confucius identified 5 fundamental relationships: ruler and subject, parent and child, husband and wife, elder brother and younger brother, friend and friend. In 4 of the 5, there is a senior and a junior, an obligation flowing upward, a responsibility flowing downward. This was not simply social philosophy. It became the organizing principle of Chinese governance, education, family life, and commerce for 2,500 years. Some historians suggest that Confucian hierarchy is the single most influential social code in human history. More people have lived within its framework for a longer period than any comparable system. One interpretation holds that China's extraordinary capacity for large-scale social organization, its ability to administer vast populations with relative coherence across centuries, is a direct consequence of this framework. The record shows a social code that survived the abolition of the imperial system, the Cultural Revolution's explicit attempt to destroy it, and decades of communist governance. What it doesn't show is what Chinese society would look like without it. Perhaps no one living knows. Code 4, the examination tradition. In 605 AD, the Tang dynasty formalized the imperial examination system. Any man, regardless of birth, could sit the examination. Those who passed rose through the bureaucracy on merit, not on family connections, not on military power, on demonstrated knowledge of classical texts. This system lasted in various forms until 1905, 1,300 years. Some historians suggest the imperial examination was the world's first meritocratic institution, a system that, for all its limitations, made intellectual achievement the primary path to power in the world's largest society. One interpretation holds that the Chinese emphasis on education, the extraordinary value placed on academic achievement in contemporary Chinese culture, is not a recent development. It is 13 centuries of institutional memory. The record shows a country that consistently produces some of the highest academic results in international assessments. What it doesn't show is where that drive comes from, perhaps from a very old idea. That knowledge is the most reliable form of power. Code 5, the Middle Kingdom. Zhangguo. The Chinese word for China translates as the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, not as arrogance, or not only as arrogance, as geography, as self-conception, as a framework for understanding China's place in relation to everything else. For most of Chinese history, China was the largest, most sophisticated, and most powerful civilization its neighbors knew. The tribute system through which surrounding states sent envoys and gifts to the Chinese emperor confirmed this centrality. Some historians suggest that the concept of Zhongguo is not simply historical. It is an active framework, through which China still understands its relationship with the world. One interpretation holds that China's recurring difficulty in navigating relationships as an equal among equals, rather than as a center surrounded by periphery, is a consequence of a self-conception built over 5,000 years. The record shows a civilization that was genuinely central to East Asian culture, trade, and governance for millennia. What it doesn't show is how that centrality was experienced by those on the periphery, or whether that question has ever fully been asked. Code 6. Collective over individual. In Western liberal philosophy, the individual is the fundamental unit of society. Rights belong to individuals. Freedoms are individual. Identity is individual. In Chinese philosophical tradition, Confucian, Taoist, and later socialist, the fundamental unit is the collective. The family, the community, the state. Individual interest exists within collective obligation, not opposed to it, subordinate to it. Some sociologists suggest this is not simply a political preference. It is a consequence of China's agricultural history. Rice cultivation, the foundation of Chinese agriculture for millennia, requires collective labor, shared water management, and communal decision-making in ways that wheat farming does not. One interpretation holds that Chinese collectivism was not imposed by philosophy. It was grown in paddies. Over thousands of years, the record shows a civilization that has consistently prioritized social stability and collective welfare over individual expression across very different political systems. What it doesn't show is what is lost when individual voices are subordinated, and what is gained when they are. Code 7. The long view. China thinks in centuries. This is not a metaphor. Chinese strategic culture, documented across 2,500 years of political philosophy, consistently emphasizes patience, long-term positioning, and the acceptance of temporary disadvantage in service of eventual advantage. Sun Tzu's The Art of War, written approximately 500 BC, is still taught in Chinese military academies, business schools, and government institutions. Not as history, as instruction. Some strategists suggest that China's approach to international affairs is structurally different from Western approaches, not because of ideology, but because of a civilizational time horizon that measures in generations rather than election cycles. One interpretation holds that a country which thinks in centuries will always have strategic advantages over countries that think in years. The record shows a civilization that has absorbed conquest, revolution, and radical transformation, and maintained continuous cultural identity through all of it. What it doesn't show is what that patience costs, or how long it has been practicing. Conclusion. 7 codes. None of them invented by any modern government. All of them older than most nations. Face shapes every interaction. Guanxi builds every network. Confucian hierarchy orders every relationship. The examination tradition drives every ambition. The Middle Kingdom concept frames every foreign policy. The collective ideal subordinates every individual claim, and the long view measures every decision in decades. These are not cultural curiosities. They are operating systems, running beneath the surface of the world's most populous civilization. To understand China is not to agree with it. It is to recognize that it is running software that has been updated and refined for 5,000 years, and that the people using it have had longer to practice than anyone else alive. The oldest civilizations don't explain themselves. They simply continue. Next, the hidden codes that shaped Japanese society. This video explores history and disputed theories for educational purposes.